Novus, the new voice. Vox Novus, the new dimension. Vox Novus, thought and movement leaders who will share from their experience and offer tools to help us navigate our rapidly changing world. My name is Victor Furman. Welcome to Vox Novus, the new voice. Everyone has heard the phrase, "It takes a village." But how exactly do we find our village? Who is in it, and what does it look like? My guest this week on Vox Novus, philanthropist and businesswoman Florence and Romano, answers these questions and more, helping you to build lasting relationships with those in your life, dispel isolation, and improve your overall happiness and health. Florence Ann Romano is a personal growth strategist and author with a sparkling personality. After spending more than 15 years as a child care provider, Florence Ann, formerly known as the Windy City Nanny, is the authority on child care and family and village support in this new millennium. Her website is florenceann.com, and she joins me this week to share her experience and book, Build Your Village, a guide to finding joy and community in every stage of life. Please join me in welcoming to Vox Novus, Florence Ann Romano. Welcome, Florence Ann.
Thank you for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Florence Ann, you dedicate your book, Build Your Village, to your Nana and Mom. Please tell us about your early path, what you learned from them, and how it shaped your life.
I was born into an old school Italian family, and my Nana and my mother were, like I say in the book, we shared the same shadow. I just look back on my life, having been born into that family and that love that my Nana and my mother gave me. And they taught me all the lessons that I actually said this in my Nana's eulogy, that my Nana was everything that couldn't be taught, but must be learned. And as I started thinking about that more in terms of the support and love that they gave me in life, I realized that I, of course, was very blessed by it, but not everybody was born into something like that. And we need to feel encouraged that we can find that in our life. We can choose that for ourselves if we're not born into it. And I'm very grateful that I was given the example that I was by my mom and my Nana, and my extended family and cousins and everyone. But I was very observant as a child and loved to figure out the rhythms and the idiosyncrasies and the dynamics of families and how you treat each other and how you show up for each other and how you live a life in service of others. That's my life philosophy. And I believe that they were the first teachers of that for me, because that's what they did. They showed up for each other and they cared for one another and the world. And so I really wanted to translate that into village building, no matter the stage of life that you're in, no matter the age that you are, whether or not you have children. I wanted people to feel encouraged that they could find their community and their people, regardless of what they were born into.
They sound like very compassionate people. Is compassion something that's taught, or is that something you have to be born with?
You know, I talk about being consciously compassionate in my book. And I believe that just like anything in life, a lot of things are modeled for us. And I think I did watch my family be actively and consciously compassionate. But even let's put it this way, you can talk about what compassion is, you can talk about what empathy is, but if you don't see it, then I don't think you have an opportunity to really apply it to your life. And so I do think you can be born with a kindness, with that disposition about you, with an innate ability to lean into that compassion. But I do believe, again, like most things in life, we need to see it modeled for us in order for us to truly understand what it means.
Now, many of us are familiar with Fran Drescher's situation comedy, The Nanny, but you actually were a professional, known as the Windy City Nanny. How did you pursue this calling, and what did you learn from your experience?
Well, I'll tell you, Victor, when I was a child, I used to ask my mom to take me to the hospital to have my baby. And what I meant by that was to take me to the toy store and buy me a baby doll. So I was always very excited about the prospect of taking care of children, even as a child myself. And then once I was old enough to be a mother's helper and get to kind of be a shadow of a mom in her house and see how she ran her household and get to spend time with her kids and really, again, watch that behavior modeled for me. I really fell in love with childcare. And so I became a mother's helper to a babysitter to a nanny, and that the evolution just kind of happened that way. And got to work with a lot of different families and children, all of which I stay in contact with today. And I'll tell you one very sweet, quick story about that, the full circle moment when you've had a career in childcare. I retired from being a nanny many years ago now and started a business in digital content. But like I said, I stayed in touch with all the kids that I nannied for. And there was one girl that ended up getting married, and I went to her wedding, and I hadn't seen her in quite a while. And it was like a movie scene. She was on one side of the dance floor and I was on the other, and our eyes met and we just ran toward each other and we were hugging. And I had tears in my eyes, just having not seen her in so long. And she pulled back and looked at me and she had tears in her eyes too. And I said, "Oh my gosh." I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I have to tell you, you are still the voice in my head all these years later." And I just cried. And I mean, that is the holy grail moment that I could have ever wished for. You never know what sort of influence you're going to be, and you hope, gosh, that you leave some sort of mark in some sort of positive way. But to hear that from her, that still all these years later, conversations that we've had and tribulations that I was able to stand next to her in and walk with her through, that left an indelible mark on her. That will be a moment I'll never forget. So I was very, very blessed in that chapter and season of my life as a nanny.
I had the blessing of a couple of wonderful teachers in my life who I felt the same about, who implanted many, many wonderful concepts and thoughts with me that I still carry to this day. That's kind of like what you're talking about, but in your sense, it's more almost like a mother.
Yes, I always was very careful to make sure that I never skewed my perception of what my job was. I was an extension of the parents' eyes, ears, and heart. That's what I always said as being a nanny, an extension of their eyes, ears, and heart. Because I wasn't their parent. And there's a fine line that you walk with that. But like I always would tell parents when they would feel sometimes that guilt or that competition with the nanny, because oftentimes that would happen. They see how much their child loves the nanny and they feel guilty that they're spending time away because they have to work or whatever the case may be. And I would say to the parents, you want your children to have as much love in their life as they possibly can, have as many people as they possibly can love them. So if you can look at a nanny or a caretaker or a babysitter as just someone else in their life to love them, like you would hope an aunt or an uncle or a godparent would love your child, then maybe it will take that competition away from you and just be able to look at that person again as just someone else to love and take care and make your child feel safe.
And we're going to be talking about Build Your Village a little later on, but in Africa, in many places in Africa, when a child is born, they bring the child out to the village and they raise the child up in the air and they say, "Whose child is this?" And everyone there says, "That's my child." They all take
Mm-hmm.
responsibility for that child.
And that's exactly the foundation that this book was written upon, was the idea, that proverb of "it takes a village to raise a child." And I love that proverb, but I felt that it was too limiting, because what happens to the people who don't have kids? Does that mean they don't deserve to find their people? Does that mean they don't deserve their village? And of course they do. And that's why and we'll talk about this later, like you said, it's so important that we empower everyone to know that they get to create that for themselves. They get to find what their people and their village look like. But this idea of village and taking responsibility for each other and one another and their children, there's a reason why that worked. And there's a reason why today we're still searching for that so longingly. And there's a reason why people are waking up and feeling that loneliness, because we need to get back to those roots, that foundation that this was built upon. They did something right, that we have moved away from. And we need to find a way to get back to that, even if it has to be a modern version of it. But obviously, I think our world is longing for it.
Absolutely. So, getting back to your career, you went from being the Windy City Nanny to advisor for and the vice president of business strategy for Yakety Yak, Chicago's top content marketing agency, a proud member of the board of directors at the Children's Research Fund and Female Strong, and also a founding member of Sesame Street's Leadership Council. And what do you do on Tuesdays?
It's funny you mentioned Tuesdays because oftentimes a lot of those meetings are on Tuesdays.
That's funny. Seriously, tell us about how your calling went from childcare to business leadership.
It was a very winding path, I would say. So, I stayed in the nanny industry until the wind changes. And that's a quote from Mary Poppins, that you stay until the wind changes. And the wind changes for a lot of different reasons. But I ended up wanting to go into digital content because I had a theater degree back in the day. And I was always very interested in storytelling. And I had the opportunity to start with my dad a digital content company that focused on mission-based businesses. So think about companies that have a give back factor. And we did that storytelling for these companies that had a lot of compassion attached to it. And again, had this give back mentality. And so I ran that for many years. And then I decided to merge my company with another company in 2020. That's Yakety Yak that you had just mentioned. And so I've stayed on since then. To continue to work in that industry. But it married a lot of things that were important to me, the storytelling and living a life in service of others and making sure that in our world there was mission-based ethos. And so I really enjoyed that time running my company, which was Kindred Content, and then it became Yakety Yak. And then at the same time that all of that was going on, I had written my first book, which was Nanny and Me. It was a children's book. And then during COVID, I ended up writing the book that you had just mentioned a few moments ago, Build Your Village. I had written that based on what I saw happening during COVID to people and people's support systems. And so my life has definitely meandered an interesting path, but there's certainly a lot of common denominators for all of it, which is it all comes back to service.
And we mentioned your book, Building Your Village, a guide to finding joy and community in every stage of life. Again, talking about villages in Africa, there's an expression in different parts, different iterations of it's Ubuntu. And it basically says, I am because we are. That's the essence of what we're talking about, isn't it?
I love that. And it gives this idea and this illustration of, again, that idea of village and community and what does that mean. And everyone has to figure that out for themselves. I can give you the ideas and skills and tools and tips and tricks to creating a village and finding that for yourself, but you have to decide what you want it to look like and what you need. And beyond that too, how do you show up for other people in other villages? What do you mean to others? Because this is not about just gimme, 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 me, me, me. This is a circle. This is reciprocal. This is how we take care of each other. And so I love that idea of putting the emphasis on the we and giving ourselves the permission to explore what that looks like in a customized way.
I remember hearing in the 60s a song called No Man is an Island. And of course, today we would add to that, no human is an island, no man or woman, no human is an island. But why does each of us need a village?
I think we've seen since COVID specifically what has happened to the hearts and minds of this world. And COVID stripped all of that from us. It stripped our support systems. It stripped our villages. It stripped our families away from us, our friends away from us. And we saw what that did to our mental health and our emotional health. And then once we were able to kind of come back together and connect again, what I realized was that not only did people have a hard time doing that because they kind of didn't know how to do it again, they didn't really want to. And they didn't want to put the effort into that anymore. And then all of a sudden, all these articles were coming out about the friendship recession and the mental health crisis in our country today and the loneliness epidemic. And I stopped and said, well, this is the problem right here. I mean, we know why this is happening. We don't have to search too hard and far and deep to find out why. The whole point is we need other people. We need each other. We do need to be able to connect to one another in order for us to nourish ourselves, mind, body, and soul. And when we don't have that, when we don't do that, then we see the consequences of that. And it can be extremely damaging, extremely dangerous. So that's why if we just look back just a few years to COVID, we can use that as the perfect example for the rest of our lives and generations to come to know that we are not meant to do life alone.
Absolutely. In your book, you identify several types of villagers. What are some of these, and how may we determine the type of villager that each of us is?
So I talk about 6 archetypes, and I always like to give this disclaimer. If you don't have all 6, it's okay, because at every season of your life, you don't necessarily need all 6 of these people. But the 6 archetypes that I created are accepting, dependable, cheerleader, communicator, organizer, and healer. And Victor, I always run through that very quickly because it's kind of a fun game for me, because generally most of the time as I run through those archetypes, people start to cast people in their lives automatically into those roles just based on context clues of what they think those words mean. And that's exactly it. I want you to look at your life kind of like you're casting a movie or a play. Who are your main characters that are showing up? And who are you of these 6 people in other people's villages? How are you showing up for others? And that's the fun of this. That's the fun of figuring out, what does your kind of personal socio ecosystem look like right now? And do you have the right people sitting in the right seats? Or maybe you've cast people into the wrong roles, and that's why your friendships are a little wonky right now. And you need to take a look at that, because maybe that you need a shifting, you need to move the pieces around a bit. So there's a lot of different dynamics to this, but I feel like it's easier for people when they're trying to figure out how to build this village, when they're trying to figure out how to find their people, to cast them into roles that are concrete, and there are ways for them to do that evaluation that are visual. I think we're visual learners in a lot of the time. And this gives you a place to really start to do the work within your heart too, about what do these 6 archetypes mean to me? And if I'm missing anyone, now is the opportunity to be very, very intentional about how I'm going to go out and look for what's missing. And then also doing that evaluation of yourself, an honest evaluation of yourself about what you're doing for other people, and how, again, you're showing up for other people, what you mean to other people. And are there ways that I can work on that too, in order to strengthen the type of person I am to others?
Now, you offer a chapter for each of these types in your book. Give us a brief description of each of these characters.
So the accepting is the non-judgmental one. This is usually the first person you would cast. It's someone you would confide in. You would confess a secret to. The dependable person is usually your emergency contact. I always laugh because every time I say this, I think of an emergency contact as someone that's going to answer their phone, Victor, and no one answers their phone anymore. So I am like 27 people's emergency contacts because I always answer my phone. So like anytime they need to add an emergency contact to their child's daycare, it's always me. So I can't, so which is I appreciate, but it's just too funny. So your dependable one is usually your emergency contact. Cheerleader, yes, you get that idea of rah rah, someone that shows up for you and cheers you along. But it's also a person who's there for you during moments of transition when you're making big life changes. This person's very important, your hype person. The communicator is someone who has your best interest in mind. They're curious and even tempered, capable of seeing other perspectives. That's a very important piece of this. The organizer is a person that you can delegate to, someone that gives you peace of mind to release that control. And the healer is the person that walks next to you through life, whatever the it is in life. But also, I'm very careful to make sure that you understand that the healer is not there to fix you or fix the situation. They're there to walk next to you through it. And they are your consciously compassionate North Star.
And in each of these characteristics, there's also the listener.
There's also the listener. And that's, you know what, Victor, thank you for saying that. That is really truly the common denominator with all of it is listening. And that's something I think is very difficult for people. I know it can be difficult for me, who can be an overly verbose and overly articulate person. That listening is the most important piece of it. And I heard it said once, and I really thought it was so well said, that when you're having a conversation with someone that is perhaps venting to you, that you can ask that person, are you looking for advice, or are you looking for me to just listen? And allow that person to be honest about what they need from you in that moment, because then that also helps you set yourself up for success to be what that person needs in that moment. Because oftentimes I think we get very nervous about having to always fix something. And when someone's venting to us, it stops us then from actually being a compassionate and active listener, because we're too worried about fixing the situation or the next thing we're going to say or saying something profound instead of being what that person needs. So I'm glad that you said that, Victor, because listening is usually the key and the doorway to creating that connection that is needed in that moment, no matter what.
A few years back, a poem about listening came through me. May I share that with you?
Oh, please.
It's called The Gift of True Listening. There often are words that need to be heard without cutting in or positioning. Your heart will be stirred and compassion conferred as you offer the gift of true listening. You'll create sacred space while bestowing great grace, with love all around you glistening. It may be any place or a soul you embrace as you offer the gift of true listening. So gift someone near you by saying, I hear you, lifting them up with your christening. And one day when you're due, you'll be heard too, receiving the gift of true listening.
Oh, that gave me goosebumps. That is so beautiful. And I it's funny. I think about people who are good listeners. Their faces are popping up in my mind right now, my friends and family. And I always am marveled, I think, by someone who does that well, who listens well. And I always wonder where they learned that. Like you and Victor were just talking about that in the beginning. Do you learn compassion, or are you born with it? And I do think, of course, we are born with certain God-given qualities that are a skill set, perhaps, that we are just more inclined to be successful in. But listening, that is a true art. And I'm even thinking back just in real time right now about the people that I've learned that skill from. And you are even one of those people right now, I have to say, that I'm learning that from. That is how you feel safe. I think that's one thing I've learned through life, is that when you find someone that is good at listening, that comfort and that warmness that comes from that moment teaches you that that's something you search out and you seek. And then hopefully that you're seeking that not just because you want that person to make you feel that way, but you feel inspired to make others feel that way. But you have to experience it sometimes in order to know that that's something you want to be able to also give to the world. So thank you for sharing that, because that even just sparked, in me what listening means on a deeper level.
Thank you. It's the compassionate act of truly listening. My guest is Florence Ann Romano. Her book is called Build Your Village, a guide to finding joy and community in every stage of life. Florence Ann, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
You can go to florenceann.com. I have the book available there. Also, a lot of other information about a lot of the things we've discussed today. And also follow me on social media, Florence Ann Romano. I answer every DM that I get. Think of me as your virtual village. But the book is available where all books are sold.
And we'll be back with more after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
The cutting edge of conscious radio. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Florence Ann Romano. Her book is called Build Your Village, a guide to finding joy and community in every stage of life. Florence Ann, one of the things that can challenge both our village relationships and friendships is attachments. What are the attachment styles and how are they formed?
Usually people think attachment styles are just romantic, and you don't think about it in terms of friendships, but there absolutely are attachment styles with friendships, just like there are love languages, which with attachment styles. So, for example, if you are feeling perhaps anxious about the status of a relationship when you're not with that friend, and you're like, gosh, I wonder if this friend still likes me or wants to see me. I don't know. I haven't talked to them in a while. Is the connection still there? Maybe that's an anxious attachment style, perhaps, that you have in that friendship. And then alternatively, what if you feel maybe overwhelmed by the closeness of the friendship? And spending too much time with your friends feels like you kind of want to run away or be alone or isolate. Maybe perhaps you have an avoidant attachment style. And it's important to be able to discern this. And of course, there's more, there can be more attachment styles, but those are the two that I'm going to focus on here as we talk about it. It leads you to wonder, how am I affecting these friendships or affecting these relationships in my life? And what is that ripple effect? What is the ripple effect for them and for me? And again, knowing thyself is always the first most important thing, usually in life, in order to kind of crack the code of things or have healthy relationships. And knowing who you are and knowing what you need and how to ask for it, that communication is very important in setting up relationships for success, whether platonic or romantic.
Let's talk a little bit more about the characteristics of each of the attachment styles. Let's talk about anxious. What makes an anxious person?
I'm sure people out there are probably like, I would like to answer this question in full detail about what makes me feel anxious. But it comes down to understanding, again, getting yourself to a place where you can kind of feel at peace and you feel like you're not constantly searching for something or someone to make you feel better or to create this this temperament or this feeling of assurance. I think when people are feeling anxious about their relationships, they're constantly going down this rabbit hole of doubt, and it's leading them to wonder, what am I doing wrong? Because generally that's where the anxiety comes in, is you're looking at yourself under a microscope that no one else usually is. And that then leads you to get very insular in terms of your almost, I hate to use this word, but paranoid, that you're making all these mistakes, that you're doing all these things wrong. And then that leads you again down this path of questioning everything you're thinking, doing, and saying. And then that creates you stepping into a role that is usually inauthentic. Because you think, here I am needing to change all these things about myself in order to fit in, or in order to make this person feel good, or in order to get the affection or attention or approval of that person. So anxiety, I think here, if you have this anxious attachment style to constantly be questioning what you're doing, then that's going to lead you again down this path of perhaps not showing up as your true self.
I know several people who are, I think, in the anxious category, who are constantly apologizing for things, whether they're responsible for them or not. Is that part of that personality?
Yes, I absolutely think that we're always, it's so funny. I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Chicago. And I was watching this person the other day talk about some things that are just innately Midwestern. And it talked about how we always apologize. We constantly apologize for asking for help or a favor, anything. We'll say, hey, I need help moving on Saturday, but it's totally fine. If you can't do it, I understand if you're busy. We always have to give an out. And so we are always apologizing when we ask for help. And I'm so glad you asked that question, Victor, because this leads to a larger question as well about asking for help. Number one thing people are afraid of in this world is public speaking, they say. But I think neck and neck with that is asking for help, that people do not want to do it. It is so difficult for them. It makes them anxious. It makes them nervous about making connections or friendships with people because they don't want to seem too needy. They don't want to depend on other people. They want to think they have it figured out all themselves. So I think this idea of asking for help, and thank you again for touching on that, it has a lot to do with these attachment styles. And that shows up in both the in the anxious and both the avoidant, I would say.
And tell us more about the characteristics of the avoidant.
I know people have a hard time believing that you would be avoiding connection with your friends. It seems counterintuitive. Why would you do that? Why do you even have these friends then if you're going to avoid connection with them? But a downside to being anxiously attached is unintentionally pushing your friends away if you're finding that reassurance that you need. And then that also, I think, again, there's overlap between the anxious and the avoidant. But when you start to lean in more to this independence that you have, this self-sufficiency that you have in your life, and you can care for yourself and you don't need people, or you think you don't need people, that then you start to overwhelm your friends sometimes with being too demanding. And by being too demanding, what I mean by that is you're starting to put up boundaries with those friends when you're avoiding maybe perhaps connecting on a deeper level. You're putting up boundaries that are then thwarting them. that are then making them think that they're doing something wrong that's turning you off, or they're doing something in the wrong way, or they themselves are wrong in general for wanting to connect on a certain level with you. So when you are avoiding a certain level of connection with someone, you have to be, and I believe it is part of the obligation we have to each other as human beings, you have to be clear about why it is that you have that boundary, or why it is that you are acting that way. You do not have to say these things in a mean way, though. You can say what you mean and not say it mean. You can talk about what you need and what your boundaries are, and how you want to create the parameters of that friendship. But it is up to us to be able to find those words and that language in order to set, again, those relationships up for success.
So we determine which our personal attachment style is. How may we improve our friendships by knowing our attachment style?
It creates confidence in your personal relationships. When you find yourself securely attached to a friendship, it means you're going to be able to enjoy the friendship in both its presence and in its absence. And in a secure attachment style, you're going to be able to feel close and connected to your friendships while also having that independence, and understanding that you could feel confident in those relationships remaining close, even if there's distance, even if there's conflict, even if you choose to spend time on your own. And some of those relationships, I'm sure, Victor, you have these people in your life you can go a long time without speaking to, but as soon as you do again or see them again, you pick up right where you left off. And there's a deep security in that, and having friendships like that. And not constantly having to overanalyze the frequency or the quantity of that connection, just knowing that something just kind of hums with that confidence and with that security, that there's a blessing in that.
Of course, building a village includes building these meaningful friendships, but some find this difficult. You used the term before, friendship recession. Is that something that we're facing right now, especially since the COVID forced isolation?
Absolutely. And I'm not seeing it really change, Victor. That's part of the problem too, and I had mentioned this earlier in the show, that once people were able to connect again, not only did they not know how to do it, kind of like newborn babies, you're kind of kicking and screaming and crying about something. I don't want to do it. I don't know. This doesn't feel good. It became more about not wanting to. The yoga pants and Netflix were a lot more appealing and desirable than actually making the effort anymore in your relationships to go and actually see people, to have conversations. We got used to that hibernation and being able to kind of close ourselves off. And now people are still having a difficult time understanding how to connect. And that's what I think is leading to this recession in our friendships. But then also another prong to that is our friendships in our lives change based on the season of our lives. And sometimes it's easier than others to make those connections and make those friendships. Other times you're going to have to work a little bit harder to do that. And also things that happen in our lives lead to sometimes the disintegration or the ending of friendships. Think about death or divorce or moving to an entirely new city and not knowing a soul. This changes our support systems, and this leads to oftentimes a friendship recession.
Getting back to this question of attachment styles and the friendship recession, how much does social media play in this? What role does it play in this?
How much time do you have, Victor, to talk about social media? I mean, there are so many benefits, of course, to it. We have a virtual world, and just like anything, everything in moderation is probably a good thing, and social media falls into that category. We saw social media and the virtual world play a large part into how we navigated COVID. You and I today are talking via Zoom. I mean, thank God we have that option to be able to do that, to connect. But once we were able to be in person with one another, again, people were not taking the opportunity to do that. They much rather still be behind the computer. They much rather still be connecting in that virtual way. They don't want to put the effort into actually being in person. And I think social media has also given us an opportunity to connect with people all around the world, globally, and create a support system that is unlike any other. And also can and span a lot of different cultures and can be a lot of different educational opportunities for us. But also social media can be a dangerous place for people where hatred and cruelty and bullying can be bred. So it's a delicate line that you straddle when it comes to how do you use social media for connection.
I know personally that I've had to end friendships that were one-sided and potentially toxic. How do you recommend recognizing and eliminating toxic friendships and relationships?
Think about the people in your life that sometimes that name comes up on your phone and you just kind of roll your eyes right away and you're like, oh no, I don't want to answer this phone call. Or you get that text from that person and you're already depleted. You're already exhausted and you haven't even had a conversation with this person yet. Well, that's usually a sign, usually a red flag that something's off there in that relationship. And clearly you're feeling exhausted by that person. You're feeling burdened by that person. And there isn't a whole lot of joy that you're swimming in that relationship. And maybe that has been bred because of resentment, or it has been so one-sided where it's that person just gimme, 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 and just needs from you and takes and takes and takes. And in a situation like that, it is appropriate, and I encourage you to end a friendship like that. A person like that is not necessarily going to change. That's probably their personality. But the caveat I will add to that is, if it is a relationship that you want to try to figure out, because maybe it's a family member, and this person has to be in your life in some way, but you have to create some boundaries, or you have to create some clarification or communication, then allow yourself the opportunity to approach that person and have an honest conversation. I heard it said once recently that boundaries are not you trying to get rid of a relationship. Boundaries are you actually fighting for it. And so that's why in friendships, and we have friendships within our own family members, you have to feel encouraged that you can stand up for yourself and find a way to make maybe that relationship work. But it's only going to happen through communication. So evaluate, first of all, what the end goal is for yourself in that friendship. And then go from there. And at the end of the day, it's still going to be that you want to cut ties. That's fine. That's great. But I think you have to decide what the goal is for yourself.
If we choose to cut ties, do we have to give an explanation for doing so?
It depends on that person. I've had relationships and friendships end with people where it just kind of fizzled away. And an example of that would be, a person that constantly was kind of badgering me and needed me and, calling all the time, texting all the time, trying to take and, needed, again, so much attention. I would stop answering the phone as much, or not answering all the text messages. And that signal was given to that person that, something's changing here. But what was interesting to me was that person never asked me if anything was wrong, or why I wasn't answering, or, I hope I'm not, offending you in some way, or they weren't curious about why my behavior might have been changing. When they weren't getting what they wanted from me, they just kind of started to disappear and move on to maybe the next person that was going to give them that attention. So in that example, that was the explanation for me, was that person showed me who they were by how they were not interacting with me in that moment. And so it just kind of fizzled away. But I've also had relationships and friendships where I have had an honest conversation, and both of us maybe agreed to disagree on what was going on in the friendship, but then just parted ways. And it was kind of a clean ending in that respect. Of course, you don't owe anyone an explanation necessarily, but what are you going to feel good about when you go to sleep at night and close your eyes, how you behaved? How are you going to be able to sleep well that night, knowing how you made your choices and how you ended things, or how you showed up for yourself? I think that's the most important piece, is what is going to give you the peace in this situation, no pun intended.
My guest is Florence Ann Romano. Her book is called Build Your Village. We'll be back with more after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Back on Vox Novus, my guest this week is Florence Ann Romano. We're talking about her book, Build Your Village. Florence Ann, I spent a good portion of my life as a people pleaser, wired by an experience I had growing up in which I equated pleasing others as the only way of being loved. I actually learned the power of saying no in my early 50s, and it changed my life. How do you suggest that others experiencing this overcome people-pleasing?
You're talking to a recovering people pleaser herself, I always say, and I think I probably will be for the rest of my life. We touched on this a bit earlier too about showing up as your most authentic self. What I've realized is when you are trying to please other people, or you want to fit into a certain community or friend group or whatever the case may be, that you start changing who you are to align with them. And then you start attracting the wrong type of people. You may all of a sudden have 15 new friends, and that's great, but you still are waking up feeling depleted. You're not feeling joyful. You're feeling maybe anxious all the time. Well, that's because you're not following your values and aligning yourself with people who actually complement those things. And I'm not talking about just being with friends or making friends with people that think the same way you do, act the same way you do, believe the same things you do. But an alignment of values is very important. And when you start changing who you are for other people, again, you're not attracting the right type of friendship circles then. And then that leads to you feeling completely unseen, misunderstood, and perhaps even betrayed in the process. So people pleasing can be very dangerous for your health when it comes to correctly casting these people in your village.
Absolutely. And getting back to village building, what advice would you offer parents who are overwhelmed between raising their children and going to work, and how may building a village support them in this process?
It's Going back to that asking for help idea. And I know it's so difficult for people to do that, to ask for help. Whenever I go to a baby shower, you have to fill out all these, they make you play all these games and do all these things, but they make you fill these questions out. And sometimes it's advice for the new mom. And the advice I always give every mom is ask for help and never turn it down when someone offers to help you too. And I think understanding also that social media, going back to that for just a second, social media gives us this impression that everything has to be perfect. We have to be perfect. We have to be the perfect friends, the perfect partners, spouses, just human beings in general, and that everybody else is doing it right and we're not. That's what social media gives us, that impression. And I think that people today often have a hard time asking for help, especially parents, because they don't want other people to think that they can't do it and that they're not doing it as well as other people are. And also having an outstanding debt to someone. If I ask you for help, then there's this debt that I'm going to owe you, and I don't know when I'm going to be able to repay that. And it's this tit for tat, keeping score. And I think that's why parents, in their overwhelm, trying to make it all happen, have a very hard time reaching out and allowing people to see what they need or how they need it, or how they need people to show up for them, because they're worried that they are not going to be able to repay it. And that becomes a debilitating reason why they don't ask for help, and then why they drown in that overwhelm.
Many find themselves having to move away from the communities in which they have built their villages. What can they do when that wonderful village is lost?
And the village is lost for lots of reasons. And we just talked about that too, whether it's divorce or a move. And I'll tell you, one of my best girlfriends moved to Houston a few years ago, and she literally was starting from scratch. She left an enormous family, an enormous friendship circle, and had to pick up and move. And I had so many conversations where she said, I just don't think I can do this. I'm so lonely. And she was not a wallflower. She's not a wallflower at all. She loves people, loves to socialize, and had such a hard time figuring out how to get out there and meet people. And I always say that philanthropy is the first and best way for people who are looking to build a village to find connection. Think of what makes your heart beat, what makes your heart flutter. Throw it in Google and see if you can find something in your community that you can give back to in some way. Because what's going to happen, hopefully, then, is you're going to be giving back in a way that satiates your soul, but you're also going to be connected to people that have a commonality with you now. And that's hopefully going to breed relationships, because it's also a not a very intimidating way to also start to make social ties, because you're all showing up for the same reasons. And so philanthropy is my first, and always will be my first and most powerful example of how to start building your village.
That's wonderful. Thank you. How may all of us become compassionate villagers in a world so desperate for compassion?
I think it goes back to this idea of the healer. And I don't, just like a favorite child, I don't have a favorite archetype of these 6 villagers, but in being consciously compassionate, it's deeper than just having sympathy for someone. We talk about empathy. That word is thrown around quite a bit in our world today. And someone said the other day, in order to actually have empathy, what do I do? And the person's answer was, yes, you have to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but you have to consider the background that person has, the experiences or trauma that person is coming from, and why that would make them behave the way they do or show up in the world the way that they do. And then that's what hopefully leads you to have a lot of compassion, conscious compassion, and also then hopefully leads to grace for people, a lot of grace for why people perhaps struggle in the ways that they do, or don't talk or behave in the way that maybe you do. And also understanding that not every person in this world is going to be your best friend. Not every person in this world is going to be a core member of your village. But it's up to us to be able to show up in this world as kind and compassionate people. And it's often the biggest test in the world when someone is unkind to you or someone is a hurtful person, for you to be able to then show them kindness. And that's usually the test of being consciously compassionate. It's not about how we show up on our best days. It's usually how we show up on our worst and how we treat people. And I think that's when we learn the most about conscious compassion.
What would you like readers to take away from Build Your Village?
No matter what you're born into, no matter the village that you were born into that God gave you, you have the right in your life, no matter what, to go and find what you're looking for. Find the people that you're looking for. You deserve it. And if anyone tells you otherwise, I hope you remember that today out of everything I've said, that you absolutely deserve to find your people, to be seen, heard, and understood, and to be loved, and to be able to accept that into your life. No matter the challenges, no matter the season, that you can always come back to this place of building your village, no matter what happens in your life, that you will be able to constantly work on that and be able to know that out of so much that you can't control in your life, this is something you can and should control.
The wisdom and experience of Florence Ann Romano. Her book is entitled Build Your Village, a guide to finding joy and community in every stage of life. Florence Ann, one more time, please share with our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
You can find my book where all books are sold, or go directly to my website, florenceann.com, and also on social media, Florence Ann Romano. I talk about all these things and much more. And thank you, Victor, for having me. This was so joyful and so nourishing.
Florence Ann, thank you so much for sharing us and sharing your experience and your wisdom. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on Vox Novus. I'm Victor the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.